Lee, how are you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad we're finally kicking up a pilot episode. I know we've talked about this for a few months, and hoping this goes somewhere successful here.
That should be fun. Either way.
Yeah. So we got a packed agenda for the first episode here. We'll do a quick brief introduction on ourselves, some goals that we share, why our podcast might make sense for you. We want to talk about the most recent PT in Chicago, as well as Denver as a Magic location here on Earth. Do a little bit of coverage on the standard metagame, and since Lee and I are both suckers for brainstorming, we'll talk a little bit about the Legacy Cup, the Legacy metagame, and wrap it up with the upcoming BNR here in March. Lee, any objections to that?
No, man, that sounds perfect.
Cool. Awesome. Well, my name's Grant Johnson. I've been playing Magic here for about 5 years. My first official set over COVID was Zendikar Rising, where I just basically played standard down in my basement because we couldn't really go out and see people. Got my start there and switched into Modern. And then from there, I found Legacy. And Legacy is really where I started to take Magic about as seriously as I could. And I've been pretty much playing ever since, as consistently as I can, and trying to play catch up for folks that have been playing for 20 years. Lee?
Yeah, catch up is probably a good way to put it. You did a good job at that. Yeah, I've been playing Magic since Revised. My buddy Jim kind of got me into that when I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. Out that I'd take a dive into playing competitive Magic. So started at F&M and then kind of graduated from there playing Grand Prix and SCGs and stuff. So that puts me at about 12 years of competitive Magic, but I figured out pretty early on that Legacy was my favorite format. So bought in, got excited. I played my first Legacy Grand Prix in 2012, GP Columbus. Did not go well for me, but it was quite a learning experience. And honestly, a big reason that I moved to Denver here in the last couple of years was it's a great Magic scene. Before that, during the COVID years, I lived in a small town where there was no LGS and there was nowhere to play, and I really, really missed it. And since coming to Denver and becoming part of the scene here, it's just ramped up my enjoyment for Magic. I'm a true addict, so I'm excited to be able to share that with the rest of the world.
Yeah, likewise. I think we got a really good scene out here, which we'll talk about. I kind of wanted to hint on, why we're doing this and ultimately what led us to this point of not only loving Magic to the point where we're playing it weekly and even daily in some parts of our lives, but why we decided to put together a little bit of a podcast. And I think Lee and I both share this sort of self-reflection that we're good Magic players, but we're not great Magic players yet. And so this podcast is really what it's designed for, is the folks that are either feeling a plateau or they're pretty consistently top 8ing their local events, but maybe they have a couple Pro Tour players that they just can't seem to beat because they're just not at that level yet. So ultimately what we're trying to do, and trying to do this with any listener, is really bridge that gap together. I would love to be able to, by the time I hang up the cards, win an Eternal Weekend or top 8 in Eternal Weekend, or maybe even go to a few Pro Tours along the way too. And, I don't think I'm quite there from a skill level perspective yet today, but I'm hoping that through, helping others and others helping me, that one day we'll get there. So this is really just a method of recording our journey.
Yeah, I agree. This probably has to be more constructive than chatting as we drive home from F&M in the car, right? I think some more structure and keeping each other honest is a good way to start 2025. I mean, honestly, my goal last year was to expand my game from being a primarily Legacy gamer to playing the other Modern and standard formats that, the RCQs were focused around. And my goal was simply to top 8 as many of those events as I could and put myself in contention. I think I did a pretty reasonable job of that last year, but was unable to get any victories. So my goal for 2025 is just to, expand my skill set and to keep focusing on standard and Modern and potentially Pioneer if they ever bring that format back, and, put some W's under our belt, right? I think we finally put in enough time that, you kind of have to remove the emotional part of, I just play the format I love, I just play the deck that I love. If you're out there to try to win and you're going to do it in a bunch of formats, the first thing you got to do is play the best deck, right? You and I have talked about that a bunch. How do we get to the point where not only do we get to compete as potentially the best player in the room, but if you have the best equipment and the best deck, I think it makes your life a lot easier. I think you've done that better than I have this year, as a Nadu connoisseur in the modern format. And in standard, I've done a pretty good job playing the Gruul mice decks, right? And I don't think we would have had the same success we would have had just simply playing the decks that we thought were the most fun.
No, I 100% agree with that. There definitely is a significant level up, and I've pounded my fist against the table trying to make something work that I've really enjoyed for a year or two, and eventually I just sort of had to give in and become, I guess you would call it a best deck gamer or a spike. But at the end of the day, like it's hard to build a house with just a hammer. And at the end, I would love to basically have all the tools in the kit to get where I want to go. And I think a good start there is proper card evaluation and playing the right thing at the right time. And, as we do more and more of these episodes, you'll get more of an insight into the things that we think about, the things that we like, the things that we enjoy playing, and, maybe even times where we absolutely hate what we're playing, but we're doing well with it. So there ain't no reason to fix it. For the sake of the pilot episode, what we really wanted to cover was PT Chicago this past weekend. Our Denver local scene, our RCQs, and then I wanted to touch a little bit on the standard metagame, as well as dip a little bit into Legacy. I mean, Legacy is our bread and butter, and I think a couple minutes on that is going to be well served for this. So,
I was just going to say, you just got back from Chicago at MagicCon. Tell us about it.
Yeah. I mean, I flew in last night, and I was definitely a bit of a drag today because I work East Coast hours, living out in Denver, but a little tired. But overall, I thought it was an absolutely awesome weekend. It was really good to see, particularly Denver, the folks from Denver just crush that PT, which was awesome. I also had some pretty relatively decent success in the Legacy Cup. I had one of the guys that I went out with on the trip. He won the whole Dual Commander Cup, which is a format we probably won't touch on too much, but it's still very very relevant that folks around us are doing really well and getting better as they go. But I guess before I hop into my start to finish of my trip, what did you think of the PT and any other thoughts there?
Well, the coverage has really gotten pretty good the last few years. The format where they kind of offset the start and then they basically give you like match after match after match, I think has been a huge improvement to coverage. So I think that was really a pretty fun event to watch. I'm not much of a limited player, but even I checked into the limited rounds. I think the feature spotlight is really fun to watch, where you get to watch sit down and watch Javier Dominguez draft every card of the PT at table one is pretty amazing. So that was pretty fun. And I've been pretty invested in standard this year, right? I've played a bunch of RCQs. I played a bunch of you and I played several team events, and I played the standard seat to pretty good success. So I was pretty locked in, and whenever you're locked in and then you get to watch, the best guys in the world play 10 rounds of constructed in the format that you are dialed into, it's pretty fun. So, I mean, I was honestly glued to the coverage for most of the 3 days that went on. Honestly, I think it's a little bit unfortunate. We ended up with a bunch of domain stuff at the end, mirror matches and stuff. It's probably, of all the matchups in standard, probably the least exciting matchup being the domain mirror. But I thought up to the finals, it was really compelling. And, even a lot of us in the Discord for Denver, we're talking about, hey, like we really enjoyed watching the top 8 and the Pro Tour coverage was really fun. So honestly, I think it's a pretty awesome return to form after years of, the COVID years being a pretty ugly time for professional organized Magic.
Yeah, I agree. And I sort of echo the thoughts around domain too, but I also think that there's, I didn't watch a ton of the coverage just because I was boots on the ground at the event. But I've tried to go back and watch a few specific to Matt Nass, who's Denver local and the first place finisher at PT Aetherdrift. And Matt's got a couple pretty unique, I think, tools for the mirror match and had a very, very just sound plan. And I know he works with LSV and Sam Pardee and Carolyn Pardee and the larger part of the Channel Fireball team that lives out in Denver. So it's good to see him get the result that he I think he deserved. I mean, There was no KCI involved, but I think he proved that he doesn't need that card to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the two things about his deck I thought were most interesting were they cut Cavern of Souls, which I think was a great idea. I mean, it just really made the mana awkward in a bunch of different spots. We were talking to our buddy Joe, who also played the deck and won an RCQ here this last couple of days in Colorado Springs, and he echoed the same thing. He said, cutting Cavern of Souls from the mana base just simply made the deck more consistent, which it probably needed. And I thought Matt decks in particular, main decking 3 temporary lockdowns was just a really great place to position yourself against the Gruul aggro decks. I mean, most of the time, the Gruul aggro decks really grew out of fighting the Dimir decks, which were the best at the time, and they adopted Innkeeper's Talent as a way to proactively spend your mana and be able to advance your board state, but not play into cards like Cut Down and Go for the Throat. And Temporary Lockdown just cleans all that up, and it can be a real backbreaker. So I think Matt's deck, not only, did he pilot it really well and play it really well as you would expect, but I think it was probably the best configuration of domain that I saw in the tournament.
Yeah, and we actually saw that pretty much in real time, what you mentioned with the Cavern of Souls, because a couple of his opponents in top 8 on two games on 2 separate occasions, I'm pretty sure his opponents just outright lost the game because they had 1 or 2 copies of Cavern and were either missing domain, missing green for up the Beanstalk, or missing white for a removal spell that was, very important at the time, right? So I think that configuration was definitely the way to go, especially since we've seen sort of a slide in counter magic and a lot of the blue decks, like the Oculus deck. Obviously, it had a couple top 8s. I know Kenta Harane was playing Jeskai Oculus, and he made top 8. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the standard metagame now. We had 19% of the field was Gruul Mice, which is the highest individual deck percent of the field. So Matt came with a plan for that one, and he delivered.
Yeah, the Pro Tour results are always ones that you kind of got to dig into, right? Anytime you play one of these mixed format tournaments, whether it's the SCG Invitational or the Pro Tour, you kind of have to separate limited from constructed, right? And if you look on the MTG Top 8 page for the tournament, you can go to the Best Decks tab and look at how many points each of the players and decks got in the constructed format. And there were only 5 total decks really that got 27 points or more. And there's a couple of buys in there, obviously, including Matt Nass. But, so there's 3 domain decks that had a bunch of points, but then there was also 1 Golgari Obliterator deck, which I'm sure you'll be excited to take a look at, by Christopher Larson. He had 9 wins in constructed. Very impressive. Ken Yukihiro also got 9 wins with the Jeskai Oculus deck. And that deck is super cool. I honestly was thinking about playing the Oculus deck a couple of weeks ago when we had our team event, but I didn't really love the plan against a hard graveyard hate. There was really no plan B, but this deck with the Steam Core Scholar, Fear of Missing Out, and Inti combination plus Prophetic Prophydetic Memory gives you like a plan B that's not graveyard reliant. And I think that really kind of put this deck over the top. And, you've finally got to a place where you can have the Oculus nut draws, right, on turn 2 or 3, put the Oculus into play, but you can also win without it. So I think that was really cool. And then finally, shout out to Arne Huschenboth, right? He played blue-white control at the Pro Tour and ended up with 27 points and constructed with 9 wins. So there's definitely some stuff to talk about here. And I mean, obviously everybody was talking about, you probably didn't see that on the coverage, but Ben Stark started the day at 8-0, got a bunch of feature matches with his white-black take on the Pixie decks. Actually, it was really more like a black-white Orzhov control deck, but just used Pixie for value to pick stuff up. And that deck was cool too. So I mean, I think if you take a first glance at standard, it'd be kind of underwhelming with the new Aetherdrift set because there weren't any like net new decks really. But if you kind of like look at, the people that shuffled to the top after 2 rounds of play, there is some pretty cool stuff. And honestly, I'm a little bit sad there's probably not much standard to play. I think standard RCQ season is about to end and we're headed into modern because I don't know. I still really like the format.
Yeah, it's all good feedback too. And I think standard's not going anywhere. WotC has done a pretty great job of keeping that format above water, especially after it sort of fell off there for a few years when COVID hit and paper standard play basically just moved all the way to arena. But it's interesting because, we're talking about Ben Stark playing this like black white sort of control list, and then Arne playing the more traditional Azorius control list. I think it honestly has a lot to do with really the card of the weekend being Ride's End. 166 total copies played across all the players of the Pro Tour. So that is effectively a half copy in every deck. Talk to me about Ride's End, Lee.
Ride's End I totally missed it because to me it looked like a pseudo reprint that we've had in a bunch of other standard formats, but this one exiles, which turns out to be a huge deal. So honestly, the card's just good. It triggers Beanstalk. You don't have to do it like on the attack step, right? You can like untap and then do it after the creature's tapped already. I think it's just a really, really solid white removal spell. And anytime you have instant speed, 2-mana white Doomblade, basically, that exiles, I mean, that's a really powerful effect. And I think we're going to see a lot of it.
And to me, it's hard for me not to try and correlate. I'm not going to say Gruul Mice didn't do well. I just don't think it quite lived up to the standard that everyone thought it would be this weekend, because now the white decks and the domain decks have 8 exile removal spells for specifically your baby Heartfire Hero. And I think that had a huge effect on the overall weekend when that thing doesn't exit the battlefield and hit your opponent for 5, right? And same with Screaming Nemesis as well. That's another card that they just have that doesn't deal any damage, and it's just very clean removal to a card that is otherwise a very, very powerful permanent if you can't answer it in the immediate moment.
Yeah, there's also just like way more temporary lockdown in the field at the top tables than I'd ever want to play against for the reasons we talked about earlier with Innkeeper's Talent, like not being an effective threat against temporary lockdown. I mean, when you look at the matchup data, the red deck that did the best was the mono red deck. And that's because it was just as lean as possible. It played another 4 1-drops in Monastery Swiftspear and had a bunch more reach, using Lightning Strike and stuff. So they figured out how to like actually go under. I had pivoted away from the mono red deck in the past when the Dimir mid-range deck was everywhere and you were just playing into a pile of cut downs and go for the throats literally everywhere. But in this metagame, it definitely looked like going as fast and lean as possible was the best route to go. And it's kind of interesting to me that like both at the World Championship, Quintanoli, was the best performing red deck with this mono red build that he kind of pioneered. And then a bunch of good players, Nam Dung and Ian Robb and a bunch of other good players, chose the mono red deck and had, I think, a 57% win rate on the weekend. So they crushed it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's definitely more your speed of the weekend, because you got to watch all the awesome games and the awesome coverage. Luckily, I do get to go back and watch a lot of that this week as I travel for work. So I'm excited to go back and watch all the VODs and the drafts and all of that. So I don't think I'll spend too much time here going through each and every card of Standard. We'd be here all day. A couple highlights, though, real quick. Spell Pierce is back, and then Grim Bobble is doing what it does. I mean, we knew that card from spoiler season was going to be absolutely awesome in the Esper Pixie deck. But
Hey, I had one more call out from the PT. I wanted to give props to Paul Green, who is another player we played with a bunch with in Denver. Paul Green went 7-3 in Constructed, 10-5 at the Pro Tour to qualify for the next PT. So congrats to Paul. It was a great performance.
Great call out. Yeah, I didn't want to forget that too. Yeah, shout out to Paul and Nick DeRue, another notable Denver player that sort of outside of the Channel Fireball realm. All those Channel Fireball guys, they make the Pro Tour every single time, but still shout out to them nonetheless. But it's always nice to see players that have sort of taken that leap from local end boss to the actual PT. So shout out to Paul, shout out to Nick.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of Denver, so obviously Matt Nass, great player, has a great sponsorship in Channel Fireball, has had great success at the Grand Prix level and at the PT level now. Talk to me about the Denver local metagame and how that relates to the average player.
It's kind of a tough place to jump into. I'll be honest with you. There's a bunch of these RCQs that I go to where even the small ones that you do where like we're lucky to have a bunch of LGSs in the area. Sometimes you get where there's even 2 or even 3 RCQs on the same day within, let's call it a 50-mile radius or wherever you're looking at on the locator. And I've made an effort really to go to kind of some of the smaller ones, but a lot of times, like the last one I went to that was small, when I got paired against Matt Nass, round 1, playing your favorite card, Galissa Sunslayer. That's what Matt was playing. It was Matt and Sam and Carolyn were 3 of the 16 players. So all of a sudden you've got a pretty rough place to try to qualify. But I tell you, the people that, are grinders here in Denver and can find a way to win, whether it's, Joe Nunez or Cora or Nick or any of the great players that we have here, they really earn it, and I think it puts everybody in a pretty good position. If you can, play every week in and out in Denver and have some success, beat everybody in the room, I think a lot of those players have a lot of good chance to have success at the RC because they're already playing at a pretty high level, So I honestly, I think it's a real privilege to be able to play this much organized play. I've been playing for 12 or 13 years. And to me, this is the best organized play system that we've ever had.
Agreed. And those are some great names. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of the amount of just really amazing Denver players that we have that can be a threat at any, frankly, even a PT. I mean, we've had more than 25 folks that we play with locally be on the PT at one point or another. And so it's awesome. It's also great experience too for folks like us who haven't necessarily made that jump into the next level of competitive play. And there's nowhere in the world where you can really pay to get an experience where I get to play against Carolyn Party and then Sam Party, which is exactly what happened to me at an RCQ and Pioneer last year, and Josh McClain. So I played those 3 in Swiss of a Pioneer RCQ last year. And, that's experience that money doesn't buy, right? So it's awesome to be able to sort of level up and gauge where I'm at based off of my performances against some of these just amazing players. So, the next thing we really have on the docket, we sort of hit on the standard metagame and domain. I think the next best place to go here is what happens to standard next month.
I can't imagine anything's going to change. I mean, I don't think that the up the beanstalk is a big enough problem that they're going to ban it. The format overall looked pretty healthy to me. I would be surprised, honestly, if there was any BNR. I think it's March 16th. Don't quote me on that, but I think March 16th is the BNR day, and I would be pretty surprised if they touch standard in any capacity. But I think it's just going to go dormant for a little bit, right? There might be some local FNM stuff. There might be some team trio stuff that goes on, but I don't think there's any more competitive standard probably until, sometime later in 25, maybe Q3 sometime.
Yeah. And we'll be looking at that BNR March 31st of this year,
okay,
according to what I quickly looked up. So that gives us about a month left of this metagame. And I think I agree with you. I don't think that there's a lot that needs to be necessarily changed about standard. And, I think there's still a lot left to explore, especially with Aetherdrift. And then we have Final Fantasy. I guess we have Dragonstorm first and then Final Fantasy, but we sort of got the spoilers in reverse order. If I had to throw out something for those that really just itch to figure out what they think is getting banned, I would say potentially the Beanstalk or Leyline Binding or something to that effect. I mean, the Domain deck I thought wasn't the best deck going into the PT, but I think I was sort of proven wrong by the inclusion of Ride's End and Day of Judgment, which are just 2 newer printed into cards that sort of took over and gave a lot of success to those players that made top 8.
Yeah, I just think we got to let the format settle. I think the domain decks are beatable if they're on your radar as the top deck to beat. So I don't know. I think Standard's in a healthy spot. Why don't we talk about the thing I really want to talk about this format, which is you crushing the Legacy Cup.
Yeah, so I played the Legacy Cup in Chicago. It was the only event that I signed up for. I had a bunch of other little side projects going on the weekend, but I was able to squeeze in the Legacy Cup. As Lee mentioned earlier, I've been playing a ton of Nadu in Legacy, but I decided to make a brief pivot to a deck that I've played a whole ton of in the past, that being Delver, really. So we sort of iterated, and I called Lee about this, about the Delver deck that I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to give it a try at. And I actually didn't even play a single game with this list until the Legacy Cup. And this is just pure going back to, is it Delver, right? The Temur Delver decks that we know of today are splashing a tropical island for questing Druid and it just seemed like sort of just filler. A lot of just, it exists because we need to play 60 cards in the shell that's already 56 amazing Magic cards. How could I make that feel a little less filler? Because I had been kind of playing the Temur Delver deck now for a few months here and there when I wasn't playing Nadu, and I'd like Questing Druid and flip over like 2 lands or like a Force of Will and a Murktide that I couldn't cast either of. And sometimes it just felt pretty untenable and kind of a waste of mana and time. And Delver's the opposite. You don't want to waste any mana or any time with that deck. So how could we lean it out? And what I did was I took my Temur Delver shell, I cut the 2 Questing Druids, and I added in 2 Tamiyo Inquisitive Students. And that also cleared up some mana space where I could add an extra island. So I'll give you the quick rundown on the 60. It's 4 DRC, 4 Delver of Secrets, 2 Brazen Borrower, 2 Tamiyo, 3 Murktide, Brainstorm, Ponder, 4 Days, 4 Force of Will, and then my flex spots were Force of Negation, Unholy Heat, Preordain, then 4 Bolt, 4 Mishra's Bauble. The mana
did you
base,
have
though,
did you have a Surveil land in the mana base?
I did not. No, I opted for a second island because I wanted to play Magus of the Moon. So my sideboard, that was sort of the big highlight of the event for me. So the sideboard was 2 Magus, 3 Grafdigger's Cage, 3 Pyroblast, 2 Hydroblast, 2 Consigns, which we should probably highlight why we only played 2 Consigns, 2 Force of Negation, and then 1 Meltdown, which was a last second. Lee yelled at me and said, you need to have at least 1 Meltdown in your sideboard. So, and Meltdown makes a little bit more sense than Null Rod, just because Tamiyo and Null Rod isn't really the best blend. Meltdown still kills the clues, but at least they're crackable if you make them after the Meltdown.
Well, Meltdown is also just a cracked Magic card.
It is just a cracked Magic card, yeah. And modern players have learned that since the printing of MH3. So, yeah, so the deck was really, really good. Like I said, I didn't really play many games or any games at all with it. I've played with those cards many times, but I finished round 6 at 5-1. And I thought to myself, and I pinged our chat, and I shouldn't have done it. I definitely jinxed myself. I was like 5-1, should be able to ID in for top 8. And it was a 122 player event, so sort of your larger Legacy event for what Legacy is able to pull these days. But yeah, finished 5-1, and I ended up actually having to play my 7th round, which was just crazy to me. And I ended up losing that. So I lost my win in and finished 5-2. Overall, super happy with the experience. I mean, it's always great to like kick some butt in Legacy, but sometimes you're going to fall short, and Cavern of Souls in Legacy is just as good as Cavern of Souls in Standard, I'll tell you that much, because that's sort of what beat me. I lost to Nadu Cephalid Breakfast in my win in.
Yeah, you told me that local gamer Tommy Ray beat you on Mono Red. What did that matchup look like? I know it's always hard. Did he win the die roll?
He won the die roll, and he kept 6 in game 1, and the 6 was really good. I also kept a hand that had, like, my opening hand had a basic island and counter magic and lightning bolts, because I knew what Tommy was doing. We traveled together, and I was definitely going to keep a hand that had some pop to it, but it didn't have a really strong like opening creature play, which is ultimately what ended up killing me that game. Is I answered the first 3 or 4 things that came down, but the top of the library was kind to Tommy, and he was able to basically just play a bunch of must counter threats over and over again. So his opening hand, he mulliganed to 6 in game 1 and kept a hand that had all the required mana for the deck, which is great. The deck is super good at sort of turboing out as much fast mana as necessary to supplement the game plan of play really high quality red creatures plus the One Ring and Chalice of the Void. So all of these cards are must counters, and he started off with a Chalice. I countered that, and then he played a Broadside. I bolted that. Then a Lelia. I bolted that, and then I was basically out of gas and had no creature left. So I was sort of in a really tough spot, and I basically had to pray that he was going to draw some more lands or more mana, and it just sort of spiraled out of control when he hit like the One Ring and some other things. So it's definitely one thing I learned about the matchup is like, don't keep a hand that just interacts and doesn't put any pressure on your opponent, or you're just going to die. I mean, it sounds pretty simple, but I thought the hand that I kept was pretty hard to throw back. And then game 2, I was on the play, and I started off with like Island Delver, and Tommy kept 7, and it was just like one of those steamrolling hands. And I'm not trying to take away anything from Tommy. Tommy's a fantastic player, but it was just a couple of those runouts that were really untenable for Delver. That was my round 2 opponent. So I started off 1-1 and then rattled off 4 in a row against 2 8-key decks and 2 other Nadu variants, which I actually think are pretty tough for Delver. Because one of them was the Nadu mid-range, like Noble Hierarch, Brainstorm Ponder, Swords to Plowshares, sort of mid-range style deck.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have played that matchup a lot. You know, you played a bunch of Nadu, I played a bunch of Delver. The key cards in that matchup, I think, are Graph Digger's Cage, Postboard, and Pyroblast to answer Nadu on the stack. And you know, when you don't have that and they get to force it through with Cavern of Souls, like you're in a real pickle. You know, that Nadu card is like still pretty busted.
Yep. Yeah, and combined with Cavern of Souls, it becomes a real problem for Delver because you pretty much have to answer it before it hits the battlefield. I don't think I won any games where Nadu resolved the whole day. So I played against 3 Nadu decks, and I beat 2 of them. The one that I lost to was my winning in to my buddy Connor, actually from DC. And he had the Cavern both games, and I just couldn't interact, and he slammed his combo, and that was the curtains for me. That was go hit the locker moment, Grant.
Yep, for sure. So what's your thought overall in the metagame? I mean, we've come from, what has it been? Almost 2 years of Entomb, Reanimate, Grief, shenanigans going on. And I feel like that's now just like on par kind of with the rest of the format. Do you feel like we're in a pretty good state of balance, or what does Legacy feel like from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, good question. It's hard to, I think, encapsulate exactly how I feel about it without frustrating some folks. So if you're listening, just be patient here. I think Legacy is largely a combo control format now, where every deck has, 20% of control in it, but they also have 80% of their deck pointing towards a combo. And combo is like a loose term. Hang on, I'm going to cough. So combos, I use that as sort of a loose term when we look at decks like Cephalid Breakfast, where they have this combo plan, but they also have this control plan, and they also have a creature beats plan. So even if you answer the combo piece, right, you could still just die to a Shukoed Narcomoeba hitting you for 2 every turn. Like that's a very real thing that can happen and does happen. A lot of the other decks too, like the 8-key deck that I played twice, they have a combo, but they also can sit there and make constructs or slam Karn and go for Karn Lattice, which I guess you could call that a combo, right? But these decks are just very, very, very thoroughly built, and the Reanimator deck included, to have more than 2 or 3 plans in a lot of cases. And the Nadu deck that I played for quite a while was the Elves Cradle Control variant, where the primary plan was to slam Nadu and do the Nadu combo. The secondary plan was to natural order for Craterhoof Behemoth. And then the third plan was, I have like 7 creatures in play. They're all 1/1s, and you don't have blockers. So this is a 3-turn clock, even though you answered all the things that matter the most.
Yeah, I think that's really primarily driven by the Ancient Tomb decks. Like, how many turns can you really play against Tommy before he's going to rip back-to-back beaters, right? Or like, how many turns can you play against the Eldrazi deck until they start, sowing Mycospawn sinkholing you twice a turn? You know what I mean? So like I think the Ancient Tomb decks of the format put a real constraint on how long the games are allowed to go, and has really forced everyone to either be as hyper aggressive as possible. And the Delver decks are kind of like, the red Delver decks, I'll say, are like on the edge of like how quick you can kill your opponent with a bunch of 1-drops and bolts. And otherwise, if you're not comboing, you're just in trouble, right? I mean, there's just a really hard constraint on how many turns you're really allowed to play. And that's why, I mean, I haven't really seen a bunch of lands players or Swords to Plowshares guys or any of the gamers that typically like to go to turn 10. They've all kind of been run out of the format.
Yeah, or they've adapted too. Like the most recent lands list I've seen is just mono green quad laser copies of everything. How can we make Merit Lage as fast as possible? And then they also play Malevolent Rumble on top, which, I mean, that card is just broken in every format it sees play in: Pauper, Legacy, and Modern.
I think we'll have a whole separate episode where we talk about Modern, but Malevolent Rumble is a cracked Magic card, 100%.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I put it in like the same category as like a Once Upon a Time, and even then, it sees more play in Legacy than Once Upon a Time does.
That's terrifying, but you're probably right about that.
Yeah. So Legacy Cup was really sweet though. Had a blast doing it. It was fun. I was there with my buddy Tommy and then my other friend Joel. So I wasn't necessarily expecting to have the finish that I did, and I definitely was feeling pretty cozy after that round 6 win. But with the amount of players that we had, I had to play that last one out, which is unfortunate. But I lost to a friend, and I think he did pretty well in top 8. I didn't actually find the results or anything online before we hopped on, but Legacy Cup was awesome. Happy to travel out and do it. And then I spent my Saturday just collecting signatures from artists, and I also wrapped up the last 7 dual lands I needed to be 40 for 40. So that was a cool little personal achievement. I don't know if I'll ever need 4 plateaus or 4 scrub lands, but I am sure prepared for the day that comes.
I'm glad I get to borrow a taiga from you if I need it. That's perfect.
You don't have a taiga?
I think Nick has it. I don't have my taiga anymore. It's the only dual land I don't have, but the amount of times that I've registered taiga is about 0, so I'm not that worried about it.
Yeah, it doesn't cast days, so I get it.
Exactly. Hey, the other thing I wanted to mention, it's hard to tell from the coverage, but twice on the coverage they mentioned that the number of people in the building in aggregate for MagicCon was 17,000 people. Did it feel like a huge crowd?
So it blows me away that you say that, because I felt like I actually had quite a lot of space. And it's really easy to compare that to like MagicCon Vegas, which the two of us were out at, this past year, where we had a smaller room and it felt like you couldn't put another person in there with a crowbar. But Chicago had a basement floor for basically all ticketed. It was fully dedicated to non-PT, non-vendor activities. So you go down there, it's all like food and it's all just different stages for events. So they separated those two, which was really, really convenient, I thought. And then like a lot of the commander activities and like other content creator activities were upstairs. The signatures were upstairs. Most of the vendors were upstairs, and the Pro Tour was upstairs. So it sort of felt like 2 halves of the con, and we definitely had the space for 17,000 people. But it didn't feel like that to me because I felt like I could spread out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was just shocked by that number, like 17,000 people is a huge number for, event in Chicago in the middle of winter, right? I mean, it's not exactly a tourist destination in the middle of February, but Magic's crushing it. And I think they're going to bring in even more people with the Final Fantasy stuff this year. I think they made a pretty big mistake making the Lord of the Rings set when that came out to be modern only, because that was a set that could have brought in a bunch of new players, but trying to acclimate a brand new player to modern is basically impossible. I mean, that format is just brutal, right? So I think that's honestly one of the reasons they've moved all of the Universes Beyond sets from here forward to be standard legal, because it's a lot, lower barrier to entry for people that, just like Final Fantasy, and maybe they've heard of Magic or they know people that play Magic, but they don't play themselves. And, I think we could even see a huge influx of players this year if it's successful in any capacity.
I agree. I think every time they do a Universes Beyond set, I sort of roll my eyes, but then I got to remember that, a lot of the effort and time that I put into this game is bolstered by creating a very strong consumer market for all of the different formats of Magic and different conventions that they run. So yeah, that's a great point, Lee.
I mean, I just could never imagine, when I started into this 10 or 15 years ago competitively, that we'd be having 15 or 17,000 people show up for a MagicCon. Like that's just like mind blowing, right? So you kind of have to be open-minded to the rest of that stuff, because if Wizards isn't successful and Wizards isn't making money, this whole thing kind of comes to an end, right? So as long as the game is growing and we have new players coming in, I think it's just good for everybody.
Yeah, agreed. And to your point about like having this kind of attendance this early in the year, when towards the end of last year is when we have like a Pro Tour, or I guess we have the World Championships attached to that as a massive convention. Then you have Thanksgiving and Christmas and other holidays celebrated by other folks within the United States, right? That they're spending money on and spending time on. I didn't expect that in or I guess mid-February, that folks would be having the time and energy and resources to want to turn around and fly to another convention, or invest a full weekend into this game, when usually we have a pretty stacked end of year calendar. So it definitely contributes to the overall improvement in player base that we've seen since COVID, since the world slid back into the right spot.
Yeah. Any last comments on Chicago, Legacy, or the PT here before we kind of move on?
Chicago was cold. The food was really good. I also spent some time with some friends from Virginia. My fiance and I went out together and met up with them, and had some great food, great times, good drinks. I really liked Chicago. This was actually like my first time formally spending time in Chicago outside of just connecting in O'Hare.
Oh, it's a super cool city, and some of the food is really fabulous. I get there for work at least a couple times every few years, and I always enjoy my time. I do recommend like May, June, or like September, October. Much nicer times to go than February, but you got to do what you got to do.
Agreed. Okay, cool. So I guess we have really just two sort of closing agenda items, and then we can just ramble on about whatever we want to. The next one I see is the upcoming BNR. How do you want to address that from a form? I mean, we already touched a little bit on standard. I guess we can just move over to legacy. What are your predictions for the legacy BNR?
Well, quickly before we get to legacy, I think I'd like to say that the unbannings in the previous BNR for modern, I think, have been a huge success. Participation's way up, excitement is way up locally. Everyone is stoked to play with the cards that they love, whether it's Mox Opal or Green Sun Zenith, or sadly Twinner Splin's not good enough for competitive play, but like it's still got people back, and I think this is the start of hopefully a new journey for Eternal formats with Magic, where we can kind of unleash some of the old stuff and kind of see where they go. I think we'll have a separate episode to talk about modern specifically, but I just wanted to say that the last BNR was one of the most successful ones that I've ever seen. Let's see, moving to legacy. I think that format also needs something similar to what went on in modern. The overall attendance in the Denver area is down from where it was a couple of years ago. The format is just a lot of the same decks over and over and over again. My personal take, as you know, for the last forever, is that Entomb is just a terribly gating card where, you're either going to do the busted turn one thing, or you have to have a bunch of answers to literally spend 2 mana, win the game, which I don't think is healthy for anyone. So I would not be sad to see Entomb go, even though they seem hesitant to ban Reanimator from the format at large. And I think the actual card Reanimate is something that they really don't want to touch. But, and people, complain about Troll, or they complain about a bunch of other stuff. But to me, Entomb is the problem. It's the card that when you draw it in game one, your win percentage goes way up, and it just becomes a problem. So I wouldn't be sad to see Entomb go, if nothing else, just to kind of diversify the metagame a little bit, spread those players out into other combo decks. Like, Legacy's kind of in a tough spot when like everyone claps and cheers when people show up to play Sneak and Show, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And Legacy's also a little tougher too. Sorry, did you need to finish your thought there?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, this also goes back to my experience in Chicago. Is like, we had 122 folks, a lot of folks that flew in, so they're very serious about Legacy, like including myself. And what I saw on the floor for the Legacy Cup was not even remotely reflecting what was on the the Goldfish metagame. And so what I mean by that is like the top few decks that are seeing the most online play did not reflect itself at all in the Legacy Cup. And that's one of those. It's a impact that only affects 2 formats, and that is legacy and vintage, right? Where it's kind of hard to look at the data you see online and use that to create expectations for a legacy cup or an eternal weekend, or whatever that might be. And the best example I can give here to the listener would be Nadu. Nadu right now has not been performing nearly as well in showcase challenges or the actual metagame results. I think that largely has to do to it being pretty insufferable to play online. Like, hyper clicking and trying to get through your combo to actually show the win condition. It could take you 5 to 10 minutes of your chess clock to do that. So folks opt to not play for it. Whereas in the Legacy Cup, of the 7 rounds I played, 3 of them were against Nadu decks. And as I was just sort of walking around the floor, just stretching my legs between rounds, it was hard for me to find a table of 2 players playing where one of them didn't have a Nadu registered. So I'm wondering, does this card need to go? Because Wizards has come down and said, this was a mistake on our part. The play patterns are typically not very fun for the receiving end of the Nadu combo. While I think for like power level reasons, in my heart of hearts, I think it's fine. And I do really like Nadu just as a card. It might also need to receive some sort of ban, especially if they want to unban things like Deathrite Shaman or Astrolabe or Top or, whatever. Like if they want to do another big unban like they did in Modern, but make it Legacy, they have to be very careful about which cards that they unban, because we don't want to keep bolstering combos that folks aren't excited to play on their like online client, or combos that folks don't want to show up and just get destroyed by.
Yeah, I mean, Legacy is clearly in the camp of a casual format, and at these times. I mean, you and I go to Eternal Weekend every year. I was lucky enough to go to Prague this year as well. Maybe we'll talk about that on another episode. But people love Legacy, right? They just want to play, and I think what we just need to broaden what's available for people to play, and that really isn't as much about individual cards as it is about allowing the games to go to turn 8, 9, 10 before they really get to resolution. So, if it was me and I was, Dan Musser walked up and said, hey, what do you want to ban in Legacy? I think off the top, I would ban Entomb, Nadu, and Sowing Mycospawn. I think that would give the format like enough room to breathe and, not feel embarrassed about adding Swords to Plowshares to your deck list and trying to play a longer game. I think those 3 cards are really like, tough to play all the way around because they attack at such different angles, right? Like one's really attacking the graveyard angle, one's really attacking the battlefield angle, and the other one's just blowing up your land starting on turn 3. So I think if you kind of take those 3 things out of the format and to see where it levels out, there'd be a lot more optionality for the players to come back and kind of play their pet decks and play longer games that felt like they were more interactive. I always feel Magic is at its best when A, the players are interacting with each other, and B, that there's some amount of hidden information, right? You're not dumping your whole hand on the table on turn 1 or 2. You have to play around the things that your opponent could have in their hand. And, how on that play and counterplay, I think is what makes Legacy great. One of the reasons I've always loved Legacy way more than I have Modern is that you have cards like Force of Will and Daze to kind of keep stuff in check, but it's not really just about keeping degenerate stuff in check. It's about giving the players agency over where they choose to interact, where I feel like Modern and a bunch of the other formats that like don't have any bounds in that capacity, there's just 2 decks going as fast as they can and they see who gets to the finish line first. And I think we need to give that rooms or give the format a bit more space. I don't know what your thoughts are on, if they passed you the Legacy crown, what you'd tick off the box or off the list rather.
Man, first off, I guess no notes on that spiel you just gave. I think that's pretty spot on for some of the key differences between Legacy and Modern. I can pull up my quick list of cards that I think could come off the ban list. I'm sure I'll get roasted by someone at some point that listens to this, but it's part of the game.
Don't worry, no one's gonna listen. It's just
Fair. Let me see if I can pull this up here. I dropped it into the Big Denver Discord earlier. I split up my list on cards that are reserve list versus cards that are not reserve list, because it's unclear to me if their philosophy is ever to remove a card that is on the reserve list. My inclination is that they wouldn't do it no matter what, no matter if it's like an Earthcraft level bad card, which that card just is embarrassing to have on the list, but it's a $90 card right now. And I think if it got unbanned, it would be a $200 or $300 card pretty easily. So I split the list. I'll give you the full spiel, the full rundown. just to give you some insights into where I think. So
Okay.
the 5 that are not on the reserve list that I think could come off are Frantic Search, Imperial Seal, Mana Drain, Deathrite Shaman, and Mind Twist. The cards on the reserve list that I think could come off would be Survival of the Fittest, Earthcraft, Yawgmoth's Bargain, Yogg's Will, and then I had Hermit Druid here, but I'm realizing now that Hermit Druid just got its like first reprint since Stronghold, and I just always assumed it was reserve list, so we can ignore that, or I can move that up to the off the reserve list if that makes more sense.
I'm sorry, did you have Wheel of Fortune on your list?
I did not.
Okay. Interesting. So you think that Yawgmoth's Will is a safer unban than Wheel of Fortune, or simply more fun?
I think both probably. I think Yawgmoth's Bargain, you can't cast it off of 2 Dark Rituals on turn 1. I also think that there's a modern deck that isn't even top tier anymore that builds its own Yawgmoth Bargain on like turn 3. So it's really hard for me to see that card breaking Legacy wide open as a 6 mana enchantment that's doing something that Modern's doing just as fast. Already.
Oh, interesting. I'm sorry. You said Yawgmoth's Bargain. I was thinking Yawgmoth's Will in my head.
Okay. I thought you said Yogg's Bargain. Yawgmoth's Will, I think, could come off because it's just strictly worse Underworld Breach in almost every context I can think of. When I was playing Grixis Tinker Breach in Vintage, I cut my Yawgmoth's Will for a 3rd copy of Underworld Breach. So if that puts anything into perspective, it is also the crazy fast mana format. But in Legacy, we see cards like Gaia's Will coming in off of Beseech the Mirror. And like that's a really good indicator because that's basically 4 mana Yawgmoth's Will. We're just basically taking that line and reducing it by a mana. And then you also have to include a card that's really not all that castable into your deck, but it's also a Brainstorm deck. So
yeah, I agree with your list mostly. My list was like kind of similar. I also just have like an emotional attachment to Deathrite Shaman. I did like an absurd amount of winning with Grixis Delver when Deathrite Shaman was legal. And I thought the matches at the time versus the Miracles decks were like really intricate and again, interactive, went back and forth, played a bunch of turns. So I'm with you. I would love to see Deathrite Shaman come back. My list has a few less than yours, but I think honestly, like we're in a place where you're better off just like letting all the animals out in the zoo and like seeing what happens. And if we got to come back in 3 months and ban it, like, oh, well, right. Like there's no, there's no major Legacy events to play in until Eternal Weekend in probably October. So like you've got 8 or 9 months to like unban everything, see what comes out. And if something's too busted, like put it back in the cage. Right. Like I just think Legacy would be so fun if they put 4, 5, 6 cards on the unbanned list this time around. I guarantee you we'd be driving over to Mythic on Wednesdays or Sunday or driving up to Boulder on Friday night, and you'd have 20 or 25 people showing up for Legacy, like, you know, every week, maybe 2-3 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it'd be cool. I'd be a little leery of things getting out of hand a little too quickly, but I think you're right. Like it's, even if it does happen and something horrible goes completely wrong and the best deck is 50% of the metagame or whatever, that's something that's fixable before large events pop up and matter. But to that point, all of the like Spotlight Series and MagicCons are all including large Legacy events now. So I'm not even sure how true that is anymore, because it used to just be Eternal Weekend is all we'd look for, but now we have things like the Legacy Cup and we have Land Run, Oklahoma Land Run. We have the NYSE Open, which is a vintage tournament that has a Legacy event attached. So not that Wizards really cares about events that they don't have their pocket in or their hand in the pocket of, but it is something to note.
No, I mean, look, I'm all for tournament integrity and for people being able to come out and play in competitive Legacy events. I mean, you know, any time that we have with our group of friends here in Legacy the opportunity to play team trios, it feels like everyone's always fighting to sit in the Legacy seat, right? So there's plenty of people out there that would love to see Legacy be in a good spot again. I just think we've had a bunch of like very small incremental BNR updates over the last 2 years, and none of them have felt particularly effective. And, you know, I just think we're due for a format total, turn it over, make it look new, make it feel fresh, you know, bring some cards back that people haven't played with in a long time. And what's the harm really? is what I'm saying, right? It doesn't affect the Pro Tour. It doesn't affect organized play. It feels to me like the risk is pretty low.
Yeah. And, you could be right. And I think that the key argument that Wizards would make is, well, you guys proxy everything anyway. Why don't you just make your own format and proxy it? But, that remains to be seen. That's something that we could definitely take offline if we want to unban a card or two and try and build something cool with that. But I think in general, we should have a really good BNR for the Legacy format and the Legacy community. I think a lot of folks, we got the bare minimum on the last BNR, and that being Vexing Bobble and Psychic Frog. I think that Wizards has a really good opportunity to pull a few cool pieces off the ban list and also just sort of correct the last few issues that we're feeling now, because I do think at its core, it's in a healthy spot. So, yeah. Any other sort of wrapping thoughts as we come up here to the top of the hour?
No, not really. I think this has been a pretty fun endeavor, and I hope that we can keep this up. I mean, I think we should honestly do our best to make an episode every week and try to share it with everybody. And, hopefully some people comment and listen to the pod, and, maybe we'll have some guests on from the Legacy scene, or I'm sorry, the scene here in Denver, whether they're Legacy or otherwise. There's a bunch of great players here who I think would be happy to hop in and have a conversation. And, no, man, I'm excited. I think it was a great idea. I appreciate you putting it out there into the universe. And yeah, this was really fun. I appreciate it.
Coolly. All right. Well, till next time then, we'll sign it off there. And yeah, hopefully you'll see another one from us next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.